Chapter 6. I spent a lot of time that summer at the Herman W. Block Memorial Library. The Herman W. Block Memorial Library sounds like it would be a big fancy place, but it's not. It's just a little house full of books, and Miss Franny Block is in charge of them all. She's a very small, very old woman with short gray hair, and she was the first friend I made in Naomi. It all started with Winn-Dixie not liking it when I went into the library because he couldn't go inside too. But I showed him how he could stand up on his hind legs and look in the window and see me in there selecting my books, and he was okay, as long as he could see me. But the thing was, the first time Miss Franny Block saw Winn-Dixie standing up on his hind legs like that, looking in the window, she didn't think he was a dog. She thought he was a bear. This is what happened. I was picking out my books and kind of humming to myself, and all of a sudden there was this loud and scary scream. I went running up to the front of the library, and there was Miss Franny Block sitting on the floor behind her desk. "Miss Franny," I said, "are you all right?" "A bear," she said. "A bear?" I asked. "He's come back," she said. "He has?" I asked. "Where is he?" "Out there," she said, and raised a finger and pointed at Winn-Dixie, standing up on his hind legs, looking in the window for me. "Miss Franny Block," I said, "that's not a bear. That's a dog. That's my dog, Winn-Dixie." "Are you positive?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "I'm positive. He's my dog. I'd know him anywhere." Miss Franny sat there trembling and shaking. "Come on," I said. "Let me help you up. It's okay." And I stuck out my hand, and Miss Franny took hold of it, and I pulled her up off the floor. She didn't weigh hardly anything at all. Once she was standing on her feet, she started acting all embarrassed, saying how I must think she was a silly old lady mistaking a dog for a bear, but she had had a bad experience with the bear coming into the Herman W. Block Memorial Library a long time ago, and she never had quite gotten over it. "When did that happen?" I asked her. "Well, it's a very long story." "Well, that's okay," I told her. "I'm like my mama, and I like to be told stories. But before you start telling it, can Winn-Dixie come in and listen too? He gets lonely without me." "Well, I don't know," said Miss Franny. "Dogs aren't really allowed in the Herman W. Block Memorial Library." "He'll be good," I told her. "He's a dog who goes to church." And before I could say yes or no, I went outside and got Winn-Dixie, and he came in and laid down with a humph and a sigh right at Miss Franny's feet. She looked down at him and said, "He is most certainly a large dog." "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "He has a large heart, too." "Well," said Miss Franny, and she bent over and gave Winn-Dixie a pat on the head, and Winn-Dixie wagged his tail back and forth and snuffed his nose on her little old lady feet. "Let me get a chair and sit down so I can tell this story properly." Chapter 7. Back when Florida was wild, when it was consisted of nothing but palmetto trees and mosquitoes so big that they could fly away with you, Miss Franny Block started in, "and I was just a little girl no bigger than you. My father, Herman W. Block, told me that I could have anything I wanted for my birthday, anything at all." Miss Franny Block looked around the library. She leaned in close to me. "I don't want to appear prideful," she said, "but my daddy was a very rich man, a very rich man." She nodded and then leaned back and said, "And I was a little girl who loved to read, so I told him, I said, 'Daddy, I would almost certainly love to have a library for my birthday. A small little library would be wonderful.'" "You asked for a whole library?" "Well, just a small one," Miss Franny nodded. "I wanted a little house full of nothing but books, and I wanted to share 'em too. And I got my wish. My father built me this house, this very one where we're sitting in now. And at a very young age, I became a librarian." "Yes, ma'am." "Well, what about the bear?" I asked. "Did I mention that Florida was wild in those days?" "Uh-huh, you did. It was wild. There were wild men and wild women and wild animals." "Like bears?" I asked her. "Oh, yes, ma'am, that's right. Now, I have to tell you, I was a little Miss Know-It-All. I was a little Miss Smarty-Pants with my library full of books. And yes, ma'am, I thought I knew all the answers to everything. Well, come one hot Thursday, I was sitting in my library with all the doors and the windows open and my nose stuck in a book. And when the shadow crossed my desk, without looking up, yes, ma'am, not even looking up, I said, 'Is there a book I can help you find?' Well, there was no answer. And I thought it might have been a wild man or a wild woman, scared of all these books and afraid to speak up. But then I became aware of a very peculiar smell, a very strong smell. And I raised my eyes slowly, and standing right in front of me was a bear. Yes, ma'am, a very large bear." "How big?" I asked. "Oh, well, perhaps 3 times the size of that dog of yours." "Then what happened?" I asked her. "Well, I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he put his big nose up in the air, and he sniffed as if he was trying to get a whiff of Little Miss Know-It-All Librarian was what he was in the mood to eat." And as I sat there, and then I thought, well, if this bear intends to eat me, I'm not going to let that happen without a fight, no ma'am. So very slowly and very carefully, I raised up the book I was reading. "What book was that?" I asked. "Why, it was War and Peace, a very large book. I raised it up slowly, and then I aimed it carefully, and I threw it at that bear, and I screamed, 'Begone!' And do you know what?" "No, ma'am, I do not," I said. "He went. But this is what I will never forget. He took that book with him." "Nuh-uh," I said. "Yes, ma'am. He snatched up that book and ran." "Did he come back?" I asked. "No, I never saw him again." Well, the men in the town used to tease me about it. They would say, "Miss Franny, we saw that bear of yours out in the woods today. He was reading that book, and he said it sure was good, and would it be all right if he kept it for another week?" "Yes, ma'am." They did tease me about it. I imagine I'm the only one left from those days. I'm the only one who even recalls that bear, I imagine. All my friends, everyone I knew when I was young, they're all dead and gone now." And she sighed again. She looked sad and old and wrinkled. It was the same way I felt sometimes, being friendless in a new town and not having a mama to comfort me, and I sighed too. Winn-Dixie raised his head off his paws and looked back and forth between me and Miss Franny. He sat up then and showed Miss Franny his teeth. "Well, look at that. That dog is smiling at me." "It's a talent of his," I told her. "Well, it's a fine talent, a very fine talent." And she smiled back at Winn-Dixie. "We could be friends," I told Miss Franny. "I mean you and me and Winn-Dixie. We could all be friends, Miss Franny." Miss Franny smiled even bigger. "Why, that would be grand," she said. "Just grand." And right at that moment, right then, the 3 of us decided to be friends. who should come marching in to the Herman W. Block Memorial Library but pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. She walked right up to Miss Franny's desk and said, "I finished Johnny Tremain and I enjoyed it very much. I would like something even more difficult to read now because I am an advanced reader." "Yes, dear, I know," said Miss Franny, and she got up out of her chair. Amanda pretended like I wasn't even there. She stared right past me. "Are dogs allowed in the library?" she asked Miss Franny as they walked away. "Certain ones," said Miss Franny. "A select few." And then she turned around and winked at me. I smiled back. I had just made my first friend in Naomi, and nobody was going to mess that up for me. Not even old pinch-faced Amanda Wilkinson. Chapter 8. Winn-Dixie's bald spots started growing fur, and the fur that he had to begin with started looking shiny and healthy, and he didn't limp anymore, and you could tell he was proud of looking so good, proud of not looking like a stray. I thought what he needed most was a collar and a leash, so I went into Gertrude's Pets, where there were fish and snakes and mice and lizards and gerbils and pet supplies, and I found a real handsome red leather collar with matching leash. Winn-Dixie was not allowed to come inside the shop. There was a big sign on the door that said, "No dogs allowed." So I held the collar and the leash up in the window, and Winn-Dixie, who was standing on the other side of the window, pulled up his lip and showed me his teeth and sneezed and wagged his tail something furious. So I knew he absolutely loved the leash and collar combination, but it was very expensive. I decided to explain my situation to the man behind the counter. I said, "I don't get enough allowance to afford something this fancy, but I love this leash and collar, and so does my dog, and I was thinking that maybe you could set me up on an installment plan." "Installment plan?" the man said. "Gertrude!" someone screamed in a real irritating voice. I looked around. It was a parrot. She was sitting on top of one of the fish tanks looking right at me. "An installment plan," I said, ignoring the parrot. "You know, where I promise to give you my allowance every week and you give me the leash and collar now." I don't think I can do that," said the man. He shook his head. "No, the owner wouldn't like that." And he looked down at the counter. He wouldn't look at me. He had thick black hair and it was slicked back like Elvis Presley's. He had on a name tag, said Otis. "Or I could work for you," I said. "I could come in and sweep the floors and dust the shelves and take out the trash. I could do that." I looked at Gertrude's Pets. There was sand and sunflower seed shells and big dust bunnies all over the floor. I could tell it needed to be swept. Said Otis, and he looked down at the counter some more. "Gertrude!" the parrot screamed again. "I'm real trustworthy. I'm new in town and my daddy's a preacher. He's a preacher at the Open Arms Baptist Church in Naomi, so I'm real honest. The only thing is Winn-Dixie, my dog, he'd have to come inside with me because if we get separated for too long, he starts to howl something terrible." "Gertrude doesn't like dogs," said Otis. "Is she the owner?" I asked. "Yes, no, He finally looked up. He pointed to the fish tank. "That Gertrude, the parrot. I named her after the owner." "Gertrude's a pretty bird," screamed Gertrude. "She might like Winn-Dixie," I told Otis. "Almost everybody does. Maybe he could come inside and meet her, and if the two of them get along, then I could have the job." "Maybe," Otis mumbled, and he looked down at the counter again. So I went and opened the door, and Winn-Dixie came trotting on inside the store. "Dog!" screamed Gertrude. "I know it," Otis told her. And then Gertrude got real quiet. She sat on top of the fish tank and cocked her head from one side to the other, looking at Winn-Dixie. And Winn-Dixie stood and stared back at her. He didn't hardly move. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't smile. He didn't sneeze. He just stared at Gertrude and she stared at him. And then she spread her wings out real far and flew and landed on top of Winn-Dixie's head. "Dog," she croaked. Winn-Dixie wagged his tail just a tiny bit, and Otis said, "You can start on Monday." "Thank you," I told him. "You won't be sorry." And on the way out of Gertrude's Pets, I said to Winn-Dixie, "You are better at making friends than anybody I have ever known. I bet if my mama knew you, she would think you were the best dog ever." Winn-Dixie was smiling up at me and I was smiling down at him, and so neither one of us was looking where we were going, and we almost bumped right into Sweetie Pie Thomas. She was standing there sucking the knuckle of her third finger, staring at the window of Gertrude's Pets. She took her finger out of her mouth and looked at me. Her eyes were all big and round. "Was that bird sitting on the dog's head?" she asked. She had her hair tied up in a ponytail with a pink ribbon, but it wasn't much of a ponytail. It was mostly just ribbon and a few strands of hair. "Yes," I told her. "I seen it," she said. She nodded her head and put her knuckle back in her mouth. Then she took it out again real quick. "I seen that dog in church too. He was catching a mouse. I want a dog just like it, but my mama says she won't get me no dog. She says if I'm real good, she might let me buy a goldfish or some of them gerbils. But that's what she says. Can I pet your dog?" "Sure," I told her. Sweetie Pie stroked Winn-Dixie's head so long and serious that his eyes drooped half closed, and drool came out of the side of his mouth. "I'm gonna be 6 years old in September. I gotta stop sucking my knuckle once I'm 6, said Sweetie Pie. "I'm having a party. You wanna come to my party? The theme is pink." "Sure," I told her. "Can this dog come?" she asked. "You bet," I told her. All of a sudden, I felt happy. I had a dog. I had a job. I had Miss Franny Block for a friend. And I had my first invitation to a party in Naomi. It didn't matter if it came from a 5-year-old and the party wasn't until September. I didn't feel so lonely anymore.